behalf of Emer, her dad, Sean Smith, her family and friends, and all patients and families living with a cancer diagnosis, I formally present this petition of 3,630 signatures. It was Emer's wish that we do better for children and young people being treated for life-threatening illnesses, and I sincerely hope we can.
Thank you. Normally, I would invite the member to bring her petition to the table and present it here. However, in light of social distancing, I would ask the member to remain in her place and make arrangements to submit the petition to my office electronically. I thank the member for bringing this petition to the Assembly attention, and once received, I will forward the petition to the Minister of Health and send a copy on to the committee. The next item of business on the order paper is a motion regarding committee membership. As with other similar motions, it will be treated as a business motion and there will be no debate. Clerk, please read the motion.
That Mr Andy Allen replace Mr John Stewart as a member of the Business Committee, and that Mr Mike Nesbitt replace Mr John Stewart as a member of the Committee for the Economy.
I call Robbie Butler to move the motion.
Moved.
And the question is that the motion standing on the order paper be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I have received notice from the Minister of Education. Point of order, Mr Little.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I ask respectfully if it is in order for the Education Minister to have issued the report that we are about to discuss to a select number of members of the media in advance of any MLAs, particularly the Education Committee, given it's such a detailed report and our desire to engage in the upcoming ministerial statement in an informed way has been taken from us.
I thank the member for raising that matter. I mean, I have raised this before with all the ministers actually over the course of the last year plus, and thankfully it hasn't had to be raised too often, but I think regrettably again today we're in a position where particularly on a sitting day, whenever there's an item on the order paper, that the issue has been trailed in the media. I think that's very regrettable. It is long-standing practice in this House that matters of that nature will be dealt with by way of dealing with it in the chamber itself before, as I've said, they appear on the media. So I just want to place on record with the Minister that it is unfortunate that this matter has appeared on the media quite significantly, actually, over the certainly from last night and today, particularly on the occasion when we have the matter on the order paper. And it is right and fitting that the members would have had the first opportunity to address this matter. That being said, it's entirely at the discretion of the Minister how he or she wishes to publish their statements, their policy and initiatives and so on. But again, as I say, it's a long-standing practice that matter will be dealt with in the chamber, particularly when the item is on the order paper on that day. So I have received notice from the Minister of Education that he wishes to make a statement. Before I call the Minister, I remind members here in the chamber that in light of social distancing being observed by parties, the Speaker's ruling that members must be in the chamber to hear a statement if they wish to ask a question has been relaxed. Members participating remotely must make sure their name is on the speaking list if they wish to be called. Members present in the chamber must also do this by rising in their places, as well as notifying the business office or speaker's table directly. Remind members to be concise in asking their questions. I also remind members that in accordance with long-established procedure, then points of order are not normally taken during a statement or the question period afterwards. And I now call the Minister of Education. Mr Weir.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to make a statement to the Assembly regarding the publication today of a Fair Start, which is the final report and action plan of the independent expert panel, which I appointed less than a year ago to examine the links between persistent educational underachievement and socio-economic background. This is an important day, an important report, which delivers on a new decade, new approach commitment, and one to which I am personally proud to endorse. Within New Decade New Approach Agreement, there is a requirement that, quote, the Executive will establish an expert group to examine and propose an action plan to address links between persistent educational underachievement and socio-economic background, including the long-standing issues facing working-class Protestant boys, end quote. For a number of years, addressing educational underachievement has been something that I've been personally committed to, and Assembly members will be aware of this. So I'm thrilled today to have this report in my hands and want to commit to the Assembly that there will not be a report, this will not be another report to simply sit on the shelf, but rather action on its implementation will start today. After 9 months' work, the panel launched its report today from Dundonald High School, and I can think of no better location to which to do this morning. Serving the people of East Belfast and further afield for many years, the school has almost 600 pupils, 50% of which are entitled to free school meals, with a similar proportion of children with special educational needs. Dundonald High School has made a considerable progress over the last number of years under the leadership of Ken Perry, and has benefited from the support provided by the Department of Education and the Education Authority as it continues to serve its community. Today's report will be of interest and value to schools like Dundonald High School, whose pupils and family continue to face many challenges, both educationally and economically. The expert panel's report is about investing in our children's future and providing them with the confidence, knowledge and skills they need to progress in life. Alongside these important attributes are aspiration and opportunity. The two, Mr. Speaker, I believe, go hand in hand. Theodore Roosevelt once said, "Believe you can and you're halfway there." We must endeavour to instil this confidence into our children. As a society, we must encourage our children and young people that there are opportunities for every child, from every family and from every background. We must all set a positive example to our young people to follow. Parents, families, communities all have a part to play in ensuring that our children seize every opportunity offered to them, because early investment in a child's life can reap significant rewards later in life. The expert panel on educational underachievement conducted its work from September 2020 to May 2021, and during that time heard from a wide range of stakeholders, including educationalists, parents and families, children and young people, policymakers, political and business representatives and the voluntary community sector. A broad range of views was expressed on the significant and long-standing issues affecting many learners. The panel highlights the commitment, dedication and enthusiasm which exists both inside and outside the education system to enable all learners to give of their best and to reach their full potential. During the oral evidence sessions, the panel met an astonishing total of 344 individuals across 24 days from September 2020 to February 2021. Their engagement sessions included 6 regional sessions into the areas of Ballymena, Belfast, Cookstown, Londonderry, Enniskillen and Newry. They were conducted virtually due to the COVID-19 pandemic. There was an almost universal agreement that addressing education underachievement brought about as a consequence of socio-economic disadvantage is wider than education alone. And if, as a society, we are serious about wanting to see fundamental change for the benefit of our most disadvantaged, everyone in Northern Ireland must prioritise education and learning as a route out of poverty. This means placing equality of opportunity at the centre of everything we do. In doing so, not only will all learners benefit, but society as a whole will benefit. The report entitled A Fresh Start has identified 8 key areas, within which it has identified 47 actions for change. The key areas are as follows. 1. Redirecting the focus to early years. 2. Championing emotional health and well-being. 3. Ensuring the relevance and appropriateness of curriculum and assessment. 4. Promoting a whole-of-community approach to education. 5. Maximising boys' potential. 6. Driving towards teacher professional learning. 7. Supporting the professional learning and well-being of school leadership. And finally, 8. Ensuring interdepartmental collaboration and delivery. The Action Plan proposes a wide range of actions to support children from birth and throughout their early years, up to and including the time they start school. It intentionally spans the next 5 years and beyond, because these are strategic issues which require long-term political commitment and financial support. I have already signalled my clear support and willingness to do all I can, and I call at the executive table to see this action as fully realised. The Action Plan prioritises early years, and I believe the 13 actions outlined are essential in enabling children to be ready to start school. There is a significant research to support the need to refocus on early years, because if we do not address children's needs early, many young children will start formal schooling at a major disadvantage, both educationally and socially, to their peers. The actions outlined will mean that parents and families will be more knowledgeable about their child's development and how to support it, and there will be a clear and seamless pathway available to all children from birth to 4 years of age. This will provide the vital basis for the foundation stage of the curriculum. The investment is significant, ranging from about £6 million initially to almost £50 million per annum within 5 years. The report also gives prominence to emotional health and well-being, an issue which has affected so many people over the last year, exacerbated, of course, by the COVID-19 pandemic. It is welcome that the panel has referenced the significant investment which the Minister of Health and I have made in emotional health and well-being support of £6.5 million per annum, as well as the proposal to build on my investment in nurture units as a result of their continued success. The panel makes reference to the Northern Ireland curriculum, which has been in place since 2007. It acknowledges that its design is broadly sound, but suggests that teachers need ongoing support and training to understand the important principles of the curriculum and the assessment which underpins it. This is in keeping with the previous Education and Training Inspectorate reports. The panel has proposed a number of important actions to address this, including rationalising assessment from Key Stages 1 to Key Stage 3, and looking afresh at how English, Maths and digital skills are assessed at Key Stage 4. The panel calls for my department to take forward its planned system evaluation framework, and I am happy to commit to this. As the panel acknowledges, this will illustrate at systems level the range of ways in which schools support learners as they progress through their education, providing additional information such as the context of the school, the challenges which learners attending face and the value added which has been provided. This will tell a much broader story of success than the attainment alone, which too often has been solely focused on narrow measures of success. I concur also with the panel's view of the central role of parents and families in supporting their children's learning before, during and after the 14 years of formal education. You remember in my statement in July last year, I said that a child will spend approximately 13% of their working hours at school up to the age of 18, which means that 87% of their time will be spent out of school at home. Parents and families need help to do this, particularly those whose confidence has been impacted by their own educational experience and whose ability to support their children's learning is hindered by their own adverse circumstances. The panel has therefore recommended that my department should build on the highly effective Extended Schools programme in order to incentivise schools to work more collaboratively with the communities they serve, in what they term a new Reducing Educational Disadvantage, or RED programme. The emphasis will be on a new place-based approach to learning, where communities and schools work together as partners in education to enable our children and young people to excel in their educational journey. I'm content to direct my officials to take this important work forward at pace. As required by the terms of reference, the panel has proposed specific interventions to support boys in their learning. As the outcome outlines, it is clear from the statistics both in school, further education and higher education that boys, especially those entitled to free school meals from both sides of the community divide, are underachieving. If we consider the recent unrest over the Northern Ireland Protocol, together with the impact which 12 months of lockdown can have on our young people, we can see how important positive role models are. This, together with the provision of appropriate support and opportunities for young men in particular, if they feel their voice is not being heard, is so important, and the actions in the action plan reflect this. The panel has therefore proposed specific interventions to help support boys in their learning and to maximise their potential. Teachers and other educational professionals also need significant and ongoing support throughout their career, with clear pathways for them to follow, allowing them to excel at teaching and learning, and also to develop appropriate leadership skills if they aspire to become middle and senior managers capable of heading multifaceted teams. If the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us one thing, it is how challenging the skill of teaching can be, how valuable our teachers are, and how much we need to cherish them all for what they do. That is why greater investment in professional development of our school leaders and school teachers also forms part of the panel's report. The panel also highlights the importance of effective collaboration across the public sector, breaking down departmental silos and co-designing policies with a child-centred focus, and from the perspective of the family as a whole. COVID-19 has presented the public sector with many significant challenges, particularly the education sector. But it has also shown that what can be done will have to be made quickly when there's. It has also shown that what can be done when decisions have to be made quickly, when there is a justified need. I believe that the public sector has risen to that challenge in a way which many of us could not have expected, and it is important to build that momentum. This rapid approach to problem solving and delivery of services through flexible working for staff to meet unprecedented challenges forms a template for how things should be done in the future. I concur with the panel that the action plan set out in the action plan are capable of making a significant, long-standing impact on children's learning now and for the foreseeable future. While the scale of the challenges, both in policy and financial terms, are very significant, investment in education from early years onwards is vital to the Northern Ireland economic recovery in the long run. I would like to formally thank the panel chair, with members Noel Purdy, Joyce Logue, Mary Montgomery, Kathleen O'Hare and Jackie Redpath for this significant and detailed report, which reflects the many hours of interviews, oral evidence sessions and submissions which they received as part of their engagement process. All of this was carried out during a global pandemic. I think the combination of their teaching and research experience, community and family partnerships, together with their skills and knowledge, makes this report unique by ensuring that these actions are challenging, cross-cutting and pragmatic. It is my belief that every child in Northern Ireland, regardless of their community background, will benefit from the delivery of this action plan. A chance to realise their hopes and dreams for the future, and one that will be encouraged, nurtured and developed towards. As I said last year, this is not an area which divides us, rather it's one that should unite us, regardless of our political affiliation or constitutional preference. Educational underachievement is an area of policy which many have endeavoured over recent years to change. But despite numerous policy interventions and significant financial investment, it has remained stubbornly entrenched. This is due in part to its link with disadvantage, which in turn links to poverty. For that reason, I think there is a clear significance to Minister Hargey's publication in March of the Anti-Poverty Expert Panel report and the outworking of that report. No child should suffer the burden of circumstance in determining his or her outcomes. The Northern Ireland Executive has considered and endorsed a Fair Start final report and action plan, with the expectation that budget will be considered at the appropriate time. This will not be an easy task, as there are many competing priorities. But as Winston Churchill once said, "I never worry about action, only inaction." I hope members will join me in endorsing this report and giving every child and young person in Northern Ireland a fresh start. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, and I call the Chairperson of the Committee for Education, Chris Little.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the panel for its work and detailed action plan that it has composed. However, many of the key actions have been well known for over a decade, redirecting focus and investment in early education, including full-time preschool for all, an early education and childcare strategy, and yet the Minister has stopped the funding formula review. It took special school parents to prevent a reduction of special school nursery hours from full-time, and indeed we're still waiting on the childcare strategy. A whole school community approach to education, and yet Eastside Learning Partnership has been campaigning for mainstream funding since 2014, and as the panel says, addressing the systemic inequality that is academic selection, and yet the Minister continues to have his head in the sand on that particular issue as well. Mr. Speaker, what responsibility does the Education Minister take for failing disadvantaged children by failing to take any of the key well-known actions that have set out in this report yet again during his time in office?
The spirit which the member approaches this, he seems to see light at the end of the tunnel and wants to build more tunnel. I have taken a range of actions within this. For example, mention is made of the importance of nurture, and we've seen 15 new nurture units have been established. In what are still tight economic times, if I had the budget to do more, I'd have done more. This year will mark the implementation in terms of dealing with special educational needs of the implementation of the SEN regulations, with a commitment of an additional 22 million to be put in place within that. Similarly, in terms of childcare, I've indicated, and indeed the report itself projects towards move towards a full-time 4.5 hours for every pupil. I've indicated that we're working on the initial trials within that, and will require then additional support from the executive, because the report itself has indicated that will be running at least £25 million additional per year. I would be supportive of that, so that every child has the same level of opportunities. Look, you know, I believe this shouldn't be about me. Frankly, it shouldn't be about the member either, or any of us within this. This is about delivering for our young people. I think this does provide a roadmap. I've commissioned this report. I'm delighted to see this not only come to fruition, but also in a manner to which the whole executive could unanimously endorse this without disagreement. So it is perhaps a little bit of a pity that some others will seek to try and pick holes within it today.
Robin Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for his report, and thank the members of the panel for their very speedy response in very difficult circumstances to this, what is, as the Minister has said, a very long-standing, in fact, a blight on our society. Can I also thank the Minister for indeed launching the report in Dundonald High School, and he has outlined the status of the school in his remarks. Specifically, Minister, this is a report, obviously, that has an NDNA commitment, and indeed the financial package will be required. Can the Minister confirm that indeed that the Executive will indeed support the initiative by financially providing a package to take particularly the action plan forward?
Well, look, the Executive has supported this, certainly in principle, as indicated, subject to the available resources, that this is something. I think it's something which, as we move ahead, indeed, given the timescales of this, it's not even simply about the Executive between now and the next election. This is about a longer-term commitment from future Executives. We will have others from different parties in different positions in years to come. It is important to realise that in terms of the investment, while there is a heavy financial target that comes to it, there's also a very major cost in not having that level of investment. We see within the report, I think, that by the time of 5 years, the commitment would be around about 70 million each year, which is quite a substantial sum. But if you take a look, for example, in terms of the Early Intervention Foundation report in 2018, it identified that each year there's over 500 million that's spent in late interventions in people's lives. And as such, I think we do need to actually look particularly around some of the aspects, particularly in the early interventions, which probably from a financial point of view are by far and away the heaviest commitments, whether we can, as a society as a whole, whether it's an executive as a whole, whether we can fail to put those in. I should also maybe caution members there are 47 recommendations. Many of these come at very little direct financial cost. And it is not simply a question of ranking these from the most expensive down to the least expensive as being the most important to the least important. There's a high level of importance within this. I think there are things which the Department of Education can get on with, and other things which require cross-departmental and executive buy-in. So look, I think it is critical as we move ahead, and move ahead even within the next mandate, that level of commitment is provided by the executive to the full implementation of this.
Pat Sheehan, I call Pat Sheehan.
Thank the Minister for his statement this morning. It's right that any policy development should be guided by the evidence, and this document clearly lays out the importance of getting early years right. However, our common funding formula directs a much greater level of resource to post-primary students than it does to a younger age, when the evidence would suggest that directing resources to primary and early years would have a much greater impact. Is it not time now, Minister, to take a serious look, whether it's yourself or whoever the Minister is, to ensure that the common funding formula is looked at seriously with a view to redirecting resources to our primary sector and early years?
Well, look, I take on board what the member has said. There has been serious examination of common funding formula. I think the conclusion that was reached at that a large-scale change of common funding formula will only work if there's considerable level of additional resources. If we're simply saying to, for example, post-primary schools, we're going to cut your budgets simply to then make sure of additional money available to other sectors, I think you're going to get a situation where we're robbing one school to pay another school. It's also the case, I think, in terms of particularly the early years interventions, that a lot of these are actually, and indeed the bulk of the costs connected with that, are not actually common funding formula issues. They're actually essentially funding issues before the child goes through the front doors of a school at all. So, I think this will require a significant level of investment. There will always be ensuring that common funding formula is kept very much under review to try to make sure that it is as fair as possible and is directed rightly. So the member does make a valid point in relation to that. But I'm loath to see a situation where simply this is carving out of one school simply to give to another. We need to actually have that additional level of investment within education.
Can we bring Daniel McCrossan on screen, please?
Hello, you can hear me, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, can I ask Daniel McCrossan now to put your question, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't get my camera to work for whatever reason, but I'll proceed. Thank you. I thank the Minister for the statement today. It is much welcome, and I want to put on record my firm appreciation to the members of the panel for this excellent and focused report. I'm delighted that the Minister is endorsing this report in its totality, not least because it's a ringing endorsement of the SDLP programme for tackling underachievement that we published in October 2020. So you're not go wrong, Minister, I can tell you that. The SDLP submission concluded by pointing out that putting more resources into education was not at a cost, rather it was an investment. The implementation of this report requires an average of 36 million per year for 5 years, in total 180 million. Have you obtained the Finance Minister's commitment to such additional expenditure, Minister, in particular in keeping with the understanding that early intervention is most effective, including cost effective? Will you deliver in full all 13 of the actions that form the focus of on the early years recommendations? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm glad that it is of assurance to me that myself and the SDLP are at one on these issues, and I thank the member for his unflinching support over the last period of time. I did, yeah. To be fair to the member, with obviously the screen simply coming up as DM, I thought he was about to put the boot in to me, but for once that wasn't the case. Look, it's undoubtedly the case that there is a heavy financial commitment that is required. The member mentions 180 million. I suppose 180 million, obviously, as the member is aware, is cumulative, so that we would need to be spending, roughly speaking, in about 5 years' time, £70 million more. The Executive is committed to this in principle, and where appropriate, we're in a position to give resources, we'll give resources. That will be dependent ultimately upon the level of resources that are available. Certainly myself, and I suspect whatever happens, successors in title will be bidding for this money, because I think it's vital that we have that level of investment in our future.
I call Robbie Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the Minister for giving us the report today, albeit a little bit late. Would have certainly have appreciated getting sight of it, and also thanks to the expert panel for the report and the timely manner that they produced it. But as the Minister has said, there are other reports which predate the SDLP's report, obviously, one by Mr. Peter Martin in 2016. And that brings me to what I believe to be the biggest pressure on us today. It's not the financial pressures, it's the stability of government. And at the moment we're not enjoying perhaps the most stable of times, and perhaps with the Minister's own party there will maybe moves afoot. How important do you believe stable government is to the full implementation of this report and its success?
Well, I can assure the member that I'll not be walking out of government, at least not willingly in that regard. We shall wait to see what happens. Look, it is undoubtedly the case that I think there's an opportunity for us collectively together to help shape the destiny of our young people. If we have political instability, if we have a situation in which across the board the Assembly is not able to function, I think that creates a level of detriment to that. And so, look, I would join with the member in saying that level of focus is maintained. As he said, it's not simply because, again, while the focus will be, very understandably, the headline figures will be around what the cost of this is from a financial point of view. I would indicate that probably if you take, for example, I think probably 2 of the recommendations account for half the cost. It is important to think that out of 47 recommendations, a lot of these are not particularly cash-driven. So it is about the willingness to take action. And could I say as well, look, I think it's appropriate that while it's important that this has emerged today, certainly in this mandate while I've been Minister, I don't doubt the efforts of both previous sort of officials within DE, previous ministers, to try and deliver on tackling education underachievement. I think this is something, even if we take very different views across this chamber on how that can be necessarily achieved, I would like to think there's universality in a desire amongst members to try and tackle education underachievement, and therefore I hope that same spirit will focus our attentions as we move ahead over the next 5 years.
Nicola Morris-Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for his statement here this morning, a very important issue, and that is educational underachievement. Minister, if I could go as early as paragraph 4 in your presentation. There have been several reports on educational disadvantage. Can you confirm your commitment today that this will be actioned by you personally? And how can you evidence that commitment?
Well, I think from that point of view, I will do all that was in my part. I don't know what the future holds for any of us in terms of the personal side of things on it. Can I say I have a strong personal commitment to this? It's maybe worthwhile to put on record. I mentioned this at the earlier event. While there's been a lot of people praised, I want to mention one person in particular who's no longer with us. Around about 10 years ago, myself and my now SPAD were first really got involved in the issue of education underachievement by our old primary school headmaster, Derek Cummings. Derek had a passion for dealing with education underachievement, and particularly where it hit those who were socially disadvantaged. And through his efforts, he got myself, Peter Martin, and a range of others involved with that. Derek sadly passed away last month, but I think that what he is, the spirit of what he sought, and I want to pay tribute to him, is echoed today in the spirit of this report. And can I say, in terms of delivery, I think one of the things, there had been undoubtedly a lot of really good reports been done in the past. I think, cognizant of that, the panel and the approach that they took was not to produce simply a list of recommendations or a list of wish list things we think vaguely such and such should happen, but specifically detailed by evidence, 47 action points, with it being very clear in each case who had responsibility for delivering them. And I think that is a step change. Ultimately, that will be met if those who have responsibility for those actions help implement it. But I think this has given us the best possible roadmap that we have towards ensuring that we can make a significant difference to education underachievement in this country.
Nicola Brogan. I call Nicola Brogan.
And I thank the Minister for his statement here this morning. This is an ambitious plan, and I think we need to see that kind of ambition if we're going to address the long tail of educational underachievement here in the North. In order to make sure the plan is implemented properly, we also need a robust monitoring and accountability mechanism, and that's made more important given the collaborative approach outlined within the plan. I know we do have the Child Services Cooperation Act, but it hasn't reached its maximum potential. So can the Minister outline to me how cooperation will be maximised, how the plan will be monitored, and how key players will be held to account?
Well, very specifically, obviously, you're right, and I think there are a number of aspects of the report that are not simply DE related, but relate to other departments. And I think you're right in trying to make sure that particularly the Children's Services Cooperation Act not simply is there at the very top, but actually starts to permeate down through the system. I think we have, to be fair, I think we've seen some improvement within that. And if we see, for example, moving from albeit a very poor position if we take a look, for instance, at the speed of statementing that is there, we're now in a position where pretty much every child is getting statemented within their 26 weeks, whereas previously that had been a very long tail. But very specifically, it's important that this is not simply something to which the Department of Education simply tries to put in place, seeks the money for, and occasionally talks to others. It's critical that we do have that cross sort of cooperation. And very specifically within the report, and again, it is the report's suggestions, one I'm happy to endorse, but it comes from them. At key action point 8, they deal with this. And what they say is they put First and Deputy First Minister on a sort of effectively a monitoring role. I think it's important, if we draw a sort of, I suppose, very obvious analogy in terms of education, that while largely the work will be done by DE, the DE is not left to mark its own homework. And I think that provides a certain level of oversight and independent analysis, irrespective of which party is running which department, that at least then that can be monitored. And I think that is important. I think that also buys in a much greater sense of collective ownership by the executive, rather than simply being, it's very obvious that every department will always seek more resources for the very worthy things that it intends to do. But this actually, I think, helps bind in the executive as a whole for this delivery, because I think it is very cross-cutting in its nature.
William Humphrey.
Thank you, Minister, for a statement. The Minister has indeed been committed to this issue for some time, and he and I have many conversations about it, and I would join with colleagues in commending the panel led by Dr Purdy. I also want to pay tribute to the folk from my part of the world, Mary Montgomery, the Principal of the Boys Model, Jackie Redpath, and former Principal at Hazelwood Integrated, Kathleen O'Hare, all of whom understand the issues facing our young people across the society. Minister, free school meals indicate that there's a huge problem within the Protestant working class boys. Can you assure us that this report will actually deal with the issue, and can you further assure us that this report will be something which will be endorsed in terms of resource and support across the Cabinet table from other departments across the Northern Ireland Executive, because early intervention is cheaper, it's also more effective?
I completely agree with the member in terms of it. I know, I thanked all the panel members. As the member will be aware, there's if I use the phrase, a considerable North Belfast influence within the report, given the panel membership in that regard, and I think that is right. It is the case that the Executive certainly endorsed this in principle. We'll be looking to see then what resources. There's already been a small amount of money at least set aside within this year's budget, which was difficult to do because we didn't know what the ask would be whenever the budget was getting set. But it will require additional support from the Executive. Obviously, particularly, a lot of this is focused in on early intervention, and as the member indicated earlier, we're in a situation which there is a presently late intervention, which costs an awful lot more. So I think there's both an economic rationale, but also actually a rationale on the impact on individuals. Specifically as regards boys, particularly in deprived areas, there is a whole section which is about maximising boys' potential. We believe that and specifically within that, one of the action points is also about using the model then of the children's zone, which has been, I think, quite successful within the Shankill area, particularly to focus in on a pilot programme within the most disadvantaged Protestant working class areas. So that can be used in relation to that. And there's a range of recommendations that are gender specific within this as well, because we all know that there's a large gap between boys and girls. I think one of the other key strands which has come out of learning, and I suppose particularly, I suspect, drawing particularly from the children's zone, has been the recommendations around the development of the partnership between schools, families and communities. Because again, as the member will know himself, there were years of interventions sometimes that came from on high, particularly into the Shankill area, to try and tackle. And while they were all very well-meaning, a lot of them didn't particularly work. And it has only been when actually there is that partnership from the grassroots up, supported by government, that we're actually starting to see change. It is also the case that all of us will need, even with full implementation, to have a level of patience, because it is critical. If we look at something like early intervention, that might mean that the fruit being born out of that maybe 10, 15, 20 years down the line, because that will be the impact on individuals. But that is no reason for us not to do it. Indeed, it is every reason for us to incentivise doing it as quickly as possible.
John O'Dowd. I call John O'Dowd.
Minister, I haven't had an opportunity to study the report in detail, but contrary to what Mr Humphrey says, the report identifies that there are problems for working class boys on free school meals, regardless of their religious background. And that needs to be the focus of the department moving forward. It's working class young people who are being disadvantaged by the current system we have in place. But Minister, in terms of your speech, there's very little of it I could disagree with. In fact, I said much of it in my own time as Minister of Education. Now, I didn't often quote Winston Churchill, but I did, and I emphasised the fact that as a village is required to raise a child, and in terms of education, it requires a community to educate a child. So, Minister, how are you going to work with your executive colleagues moving forward to ensure that the executive, as you, I think you pointed out in some of your previous answers, that the executive takes on the mantle of ensuring that our education system works for all young people?
Look, I thank the member, and look, I think to be fair across the chamber, whether I'm quoting Winston Churchill, I believe you're quoting Hillary Clinton in relation to that. I think we all should share the same objectives. I think in working with colleagues, I brought the paper directly to the executives, an NDNA commitment, which actually takes it beyond simply what happens in DE in and of itself. I think we will work as part of this to start developing each of the 47 points. Some of the things will be much more long-term. They're things that even if there was every piece of work getting done now, would not be able to be realised for a few years. There are other things that can move a lot quicker. As indicated, we will be keeping everybody informed, but as part of this, as a part of the element of the report, it is that the oversight of this goes to the executive as a whole, but particularly to TEO. And indeed, from that point of view, we will be held to account, I suppose, both by public opinion, but also directly within the executive in terms of that level of delivery. And it is important, and there will be a number of aspects of this which are cross-cutting. It's important we get that level of cooperation, not simply financially, but also actually in terms of delivery. So I don't think I'm in any particular disagreement with the member opposite.
Justin McNulty. I call Justin McNulty.
Can I thank the Minister for his statement, and I warmly welcome the thrust of that statement. I thank the members of the panel for their efforts in preparing the report. I share the Minister's desire that his report cannot become another report that sits on a shelf. To further probe my colleagues' questions earlier, Minister, what discussions have you had with the Finance Minister in relation to funding the proposals, given the already well-documented pressures on school budgets? This cannot be funded by year-end or monitoring round monies. And secondly, the Minister will be familiar with the pressure on preschool nursery places. Does he see preschool being mandatory as an outcome of these proposals? And given the huge pressures on nursery places, and will he see this report mean that there will be more places, or how many more places will be provided as an outcome of this report proposals?
I think, look, I take on board what the member has said. In terms of finance, the executive endorsed this in principle. It indicated that it would support it as resources are available. I think one of the restrictions, I'm sure the Finance Minister will be keen to say this, is that at present, and I know there is talk this autumn of, in a wider context, moving towards multi-annual budgets, is that we only know the budget for this financial year, and indeed this obviously comes part of the way through the year. With that in mind, there is some money that's been set aside this year within the DE budget, but the member is right that if this is to be supported, it can't be carved out of existing budgets. There may be the odd tweak here and there, but generally speaking, this requires additional money. So that will have to be ongoing discussions, which will go beyond simply what is happening now, but well into the next mandate on that basis. In terms of preschool places, I suppose the problem, in terms of pure numbers, the statistics would suggest now there may not be an absolute match between where places are and where the demand is, but broadly speaking, the allocation of preschool places does overall meet the level of demand. So it's not a question of there being additional places per se. The problem in terms of preschool places is that we have a concoction of, roughly speaking, I think roughly about 37–38% of those being what might be described as full-time, 4.5 hours, and the remainder are 2.5 hours. And the aim would be to try to move that up to a scenario, and this is also part of the broader childcare strategy of offer that would be there, of moving that up so that everybody gets a 4.5-hour package. From that point of view, therefore, it's probably not about creating massive numbers of additional spaces, but actually creating those on the basis of the amount of time that can be provided. But that in and of itself will create not just pressures on resources but also capital places, because if you take, for instance, a number of preschool settings where they have a morning setting for one group and an afternoon setting for another, and we're then saying actually you need to move that everybody can be full-time, that will create additional pressures within those. Some of those will be capital. Some of those will also require a level of additional staffing within the overall preschool settings, because again, if you're moving to a bigger offer, you've clearly got to have more staff to be able to deal with that. So those will be part of the challenges. That is identified, I suppose, in the report as being something which, in terms of moving up to that position, because again, probably that entitlement will probably require legislation. At least it has been the case that where there's been that full-time provision in other jurisdictions, that has been underpinned by legislation. So that will be required as well. So there will be a considerable journey to be gone down. But the report, and it's probably the biggest financial aspect clearly within the report, that if we were to move towards that in terms of the childcare setting, I think that's something which would be advantageous. The panel is clearly looking at it principally from the point of view of the children, but I think for families as a whole, that would be something that would be advantageous to society.
Call Rosemary Barton.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for your statement, and also can I thank the panel for their preparation in the report. Thank you. Minister, you refer in your statement about the central role of parents in relation to supporting their families and supporting their children as they go forward into education. Some of these parents may have had a bad experience at school themselves. How do you go about bringing those parents along with you in encouraging them to support their young children?
Look, the member makes a very good point, which I suppose is twofold. If we take a look at a range of the interventions that are being looked at in terms of early interventions, a lot of those are targeted at particular interventions. And so, for instance, we look at what Sure Start does, what other organisations do. It's about, for example, health visitors. It's about actually trying to ensure there's that embedding within the family. It is also the case that if we look at the aspect of the report that deals with the whole community aspect, as it's called, it talks about families, it talks about community side of things. And the member is right. It may well be that quite often we see issues that, for example, we know that the children are disadvantaged when, for example, in terms of their verbal skills, they don't get the same level of parents reading to them before they reach school age. And often that, as the member indicates, is often because there is maybe sometimes a little bit of a sense of even embarrassment sometimes to some parents. They don't have those skills. They had a bad experience of school. I think there are good models out there that in terms of involvement of, and through a soft interventions, that can lead to actually drawing in of parents. And I note recently, having visited the North Belfast Principals Group, but particularly in Mercy Primary School, there were a number of parents who were in there. Now, it was a school which has produced, trying to do this in a cross-party way, that on the walls were pictures of Mary McAleese, who's a past pupil, pictures of Nuala McAllister, who's the former Lord Mayor of Belfast, and also a picture of Nicola Mallon of the SDLP. But despite all that, I was still very keen to go to the school. Look, the reality is they have a very strong success record of being able to engage parents, being able to get them in. And I think one of the things that the report does highlight is actually there are a lot of good things happening out there in the system. And in part, it's also about trying to ensure that that best practice is put in place. Again, with parents, as with other aspects of this, if there was a single action that would be a solution to all these problems, I think it would have been taken years ago. So it is about this overall cocktail, but the member is absolutely right. The centrality of parents, and parents can't simply become a byproduct in this. We can't simply talk about schools and children and forget the parents are out there, forget that the wider community is out there. Unless all these aspects are brought in together, this will not work.
I call Harry Harvey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for her statement. Minister, what areas of cooperation will be needed with other departments if the report and the action plan is to be implemented successfully?
The member for his question, I suppose there's a number of aspects to that. Mention is already made that there needs to be a whole executive commitment from the point of view of finance, which is critical moving forward. The overall ownership of the report by the Executive, I think, will be enhanced by the monitoring arrangements that has been mentioned. But very specifically on some of the other 46 points, there are a number of aspects which are cross-cutting in their nature. So, for example, if you look at the early years proposals in the key part 1 of this, the 13 proposals, a number of those fall to either at times the Department of Health or the Department of Health in cooperation with the Department of Education. So issues around, for example, health visitors, making sure that there is that, while respecting data protection, there's a flow of knowledge and information and cooperation on the ground. It's critical, particularly when we talk about health in terms of early intervention and also support for emotional health and well-being. And there are also aspects which I know my colleague Diane Dodds and myself and others within the department have been working on. It is important there's much more a joined-up approach as we look towards the other end of the spectrum of schooling. The 14 to 19 strategy, I think, is important, that we do have clear career paths, and too often perhaps those within those sectors have slightly been a bit of a silo mentality, be it schools or FE colleges. We need to get that much more holistic approach. So, if this is simply ends up being DE going out to bat simply for a range of action points, yes, some of those can be simply achieved on their own, but this will only be at its most successful where there is that full level of cooperation, not just at the level around the ministerial table, but also actually on the ground between departments in terms of delivery.
And I thank the Minister for his statement this morning. This is yet another report which makes criticism of academic selection and transfer tests, and while it refrains from making a determination on academic selection to allow the independent review panel to deal with it, it makes important points in respect of the mental health impact of transfer tests and the fact that it skews teaching its key stage 2. So we need to be evidence-led when it comes to policy. So can I ask the Minister if the independent review recommends ending transfer tests and academic selection, if he will act in accordance with that recommendation?
We've made it clear in terms of I accept fully the report. From that point of view, there are widespread differences of opinion in terms of academic selection. I will not be moving to remove academic selection because, frankly, I think that will enhance differences rather than make them smaller. Look, I think there's a bit of a danger. Look, I can be accused of this as much as members opposite, that when it comes to the issue of the transfer test and academic selection, we can all see this as being a little bit of a hobby horse that we ride. And I'm sure I've done as much jockeying as maybe some members opposite as well in relation to that. It is important that in terms of this report that the action points are followed through. And in particular, one of the concerns that I've always had in terms of some of the discussion around Transfer at 11, and it will be part of the independent, wider independent report when it establishes itself, is there's a danger that that becomes the focus of everybody's attention, whereas the real interventions, the strongest interventions that we can make in terms of issues around inequality are actually before the child walks through the door of the school in the first place, and we shouldn't lose the focus on that.
Paula Bradshaw.
Speaker, thank you, Minister, for your statement today and to the panel for the report. Before I entered full-time politics, I worked in the Donegal Road, and we had a project called Tree, which was effectively an alternative education provider. And when we received applications for it, I would have said to Graham, the manager there, what's their backstory? And every single child, and they're all males, every single male who came before us, their father was in prison, their mother was an alcoholic, etc. And I'm not apportioning blame to the parents as such. But the children in many ways had so many hurdles to get over before they could actually get to their classroom desk and actually fully concentrate on their studies. We have some amazing schools in South Belfast, but some of them are very much under pressure. And I would pick out Breda Academy, for example, which has had falling roll numbers. It is the only non-selective, non-denomination school in South Belfast, and the head teacher, Mr Perry, is doing an amazing job. But they aren't properly funded to equip with the young people that are coming forward. What in this report is about more systemic changes in terms of the education system to better support those schools for children who do not go through the transfer tests? Thank you.
Very specifically, obviously, clearly, I think first of all, I'd say schools in South Belfast do a tremendous job. I think schools across Northern Ireland, there's a high level of dedication. I think where the report seeks to, and I think, to be fair, it doesn't pretend that it can cure everything. This is about, the member rightly mentioned about the hurdles in young people's lives. I suppose this is about trying to find a pathway where we can at least reduce the number of hurdles, or at least the height of the hurdles. I don't think it would be strongly aspirational to say that we can get an entirely level playing field for everybody completely in society. I think in terms of additional levels of support, it looks, for instance, within this at looking at, for example, tailored support through a new proposal which builds upon extended schools, of reducing educational disadvantage, which will actually look to see what the links are between the school, the parents and the community, and try and provide holistic solutions. Because I'm sure also the member would agree with me as well, and I know through her previous work she made a strong difference in this as well. It's not simply about the particular support for the schools, because the schools do the best that they can, but actually that support that is happening within the home and within communities as a whole will be critical as well. So I think that will point towards systemic levels of change within that. And again, look, it is the case, as I've said before, if this was a single silver bullet that we could fire, which would cure all this, I think either collectively or somebody would have fired that before. It's actually about a cocktail of measures, which is why there's 47 recommendations 47 action points within the plan. There's no single one will be the solution to this. It's actually the culmination of, or the combination of those that will be of importance.
I call Colin McGrath.
Mr Speaker, and I, Minister, would ask that in your statement you'd referenced that addressing educational underachievement is brought about as a consequence of socio-economic disadvantage and wider than education, and that approximately 13% of the waking hours of children is spent in school. What role do you think youth services could play in helping to deliver a closure in this gap of attainment, and was any consideration given by the group to the role that youth services could play, and possibly an enhanced role that youth services could play in the future?
The member will forgive me. Look, I think from that point of view, youth services have an important role to play. I know, and I can understand this, having visited at times youth services, that they feel that everybody talks about education, they immediately think of schools. They don't think about youth service. And I know the tremendous work that's going on the ground throughout Northern Ireland in terms of youth service. I think it is important that both youth service, both directly those through EA, but also actually voluntary youth organisations. And, for example, the contribution that is made by uniformed organisations in terms of trying to provide good pathways for our young people is critical as well. Look, from the perspective, I mean, I indicated I'm happy to endorse everything that's in it. It is an independent report. I didn't try to interfere with any of the recommendations or try to steer them in any direction. So the member will forgive me, I wasn't therefore present when whatever internal discussions about what weight they would give to certain things, what level of discussions they would have in relation to youth services, for instance. So I can't answer that question directly in that regard. But I think certainly there's an awareness across the system, which is why I think there's a critical role, particularly, for instance, this summer and beyond, for youth services, as we look to try and aid recovery for our young people as they come out of the COVID pandemic.
I call Mike Nesbitt.
Thank you very much. Mr Speaker, can I too welcome the report and congratulate Dr Purdy, Jackie Redpath and the rest of the team. Some reports are revelatory, others are confirmatory, and I believe this one falls into the latter category, Minister. I'm interested in key area 3, ensuring relevance and appropriateness of curriculum and assessment, where they say there's a lack of parity of esteem and understanding between academic and vocational pathways, and also that a cultural change is needed which recognises the benefits of both academic and vocational pathways. If the Minister agrees, as I do, with those statements, can I ask why it hasn't happened yet?
There has been considerable work which, in relation, I do agree with those proposals in relation to it. There is considerable work which is in an advanced stage, particularly in looking towards how qualifications operate and career paths operate on the 14 to 19 side of it. That was work which I think was actually commenced in a previous, towards the end of the previous administration. I think it was actually by Minister Hamilton and myself in relation to it. There was a considerable amount of work that has been ongoing between the departments in relation to that. It was, I think, became victim for a while of the COVID situation, We have now got a situation where we're very close to a final report. There's been presentations to myself and Minister Dodds. There's a little bit of fine-tuning to be done on that, but that will emerge very soon. It is important, he is right, that we reach a point at which those who would seek a more vocational route, well, an academic route, are not seen in some way as a second-class path. Even from the point of view of life opportunities, it is probably at the moment some of those who are going down a vocational path who will have a much more worthwhile sort of job experience than maybe some who go down a very strong academic path. So I agree with the member, and I think that that will be something from both departments. Department for Economy on the 14-night strategy is taking a lead on that, and I anticipate that a report would emerge on that very soon.
Before I call the next speaker, I could just say that we have a further 6 speakers who wish to comment or ask a question. So could I ask the next speakers to go more directly to their question, and even ask the Minister if he could try to moderate some of the responses. So I call Rachel Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too welcome the report, and thanks to those who put so much work into producing it. And the onus is now on the Executive to ensure that it's fully funded and implemented. But the Minister will be aware of the recent NI Audit Office report stating that the Department of Education is unable to demonstrate the effectiveness of its 2 main funding interventions, accounting for almost £102 million that is provided to address the educational attainment of pupils from socially disadvantaged backgrounds. So can the Minister explain why this department have failed to introduce adequate arrangements to assess the effectiveness of these interventions and whether they are contributing to the achievement of outcomes?
Look, I think from that point of view, the report itself does indicate, and indeed as part of that we accept that there would need to be a greater level of monitoring within that. I suppose it's trying to strike a balance between... I think it's important that there's monitoring, but it's also there's got to be a level of flexibility given to schools as well to decide on the ground how they can best make interventions. So it's about trying to strike a balance. But obviously, particularly as regards TSN funding, there's specific action points that arise within the report itself. I appreciate there's probably limited time to read that, which talks about better monitoring arrangements within those. I think that's probably got to be done at a more particularly generic level that can be done through ETI, for instance, on that basis. But there's no doubt, I think, that the levels of intervention, while there's perhaps a need for them to be better targeted, have made a difference. There's been actually policies of successive administrations and actually at least have delivered for many of our young people.
I call Jim Allister.
I want to return to the theme of the question asked by Mrs Barton and indeed Ms Branshaw. It seems pretty clear to me that a fundamental issue here is the disconnect between parents and the education of their children, and the lack of encouragement many times in that regard. So when the Minister refers to the existing extended schools programme and then tells us we're going to move on to something shorthanded as the RED programme, what could he tell us is new about the RED programme that is going to really address that fundamental issue? And could I also express concern, like some others, that if there is no settled funding programme here, are we in danger of simply start-stop funding depending on monitoring rounds and all the instability of that? And is that really the way to go? And finally, if this should prove to be the last statement by the Minister as Minister of Education in this House, could I wish him well?
I'm sure his wishes will be greatly on the mind of decisions that will be taken in the next few days in relation to my particular position in relation to it. Look, can I say in relation to a couple of points that the member made, yeah, I certainly acknowledge, I think the parents are at the heart of this. The issue, I suppose, in terms of extended schools probably have been given a level of pure flexibility for the schools to be able to spend. A lot of those are actually very good programmes that are put in place. As indicated by the report, the RED programme in terms of a proposal is actually about trying to provide holistic solutions which actually are monitored to see what the direct linkages are between the schools, the parents and the community. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I gave the example of the Shankle. It has actually been to the children's zone which is actually starting to produce dividends, where there is putting the community and parents very much at the heart of what is being delivered. That is, I think, is very much and I think it's referenced in the report as a good working example which should be built upon as well. In terms of the broader bit of funding, as I said, I've indicated there is a small amount being set aside this year's budget. We have a particular problem that the budget was set before the report, even at interim level, was delivered. So that made it difficult to be able to allocate money directly. I think what we will need to see over the forthcoming years will actually be mainstreaming of a budget. There may well be in the short term a situation in which particular monitoring rounds may have to be relied upon in 21-22, but we need to see this mainstreamed in terms of funding across the board by the Executive. I think, to be fair, given the fact that the Executive itself, because of the current settlement with Westminster, which I think because of COVID the intention had been that Westminster across the board was to have comprehensive spending reviews to give certainty over a period of years. At the moment, in terms of the budget for 22-23, nobody has a clue what that is for any department or for Stormont as a whole. So I think it becomes very difficult to give a absolutely firm commitment to what happens in 22-23 because that's at least a level of constraint. But look, I agree with the member. It can't be simply in a long-term situation trying to pluck down whatever funding becomes available. It's got to be something that's mainstream.
Call Jerry Carroll.
Minister and the panel for their work. Minister mentioned socio-economic disadvantage and poverty, but almost in passing. There's no doubt this is the main determinant in education as life and also the main cause of underachievement. Would the Minister agree with me that unless the Executive sets out a policy and implements one to eradicate poverty, then we're going to come back to the issue of education underachievement year after year after year after year? Would you agree with that assessment?
Well, from the point of view I've indicated, there's a very clear linkage between socio-economic, and indeed the report itself makes it very clear. There's a linkage between socio-economic deprivation and education underachievement. That's undoubtedly the case. That's why I think, as I've indicated in my statement, that if there are to be broader solutions, yes, there's key work to be done in terms of the action points of this report, and that will require key commitments of the Executive. But if there are wider issues around poverty to be tackled, it's got to be tackled by the Executive as a whole. So I loath to maybe entirely tick the box for the member, but I'm maybe as close as I've been at any stage over the last year to agreeing with him on that. That may mean that for those on a the member's graciousness, as always, is greatly reciprocated. Look, the member and myself finding myself in the same position may well have different people, particularly of strong religious views, flicking through Revelations to see if there's this is perhaps a portent of the end of the world. But just occasionally there are at least levels of overlap between the member's position and mine. But I suspect that neither of us should put that on our election literature. I don't think we do either of us any favours.
Call Claire Sugden.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank the Minister for the report. It's a good report, but it needs to sit within a wider context, and I suppose I'm looking less forward to your successor and maybe more to the next mandate to see what a programme for government will look like and how that report will sit within that, because the Minister's entirely right. This isn't just up to his department. It will require cross-departmental work, not least at the other end in terms of further and higher education, but also the Department of Health and Mental Health and Resilience. He talks about health and well-being within that, but I would like to see more specifics about mental health and resilience, because I think schools and the education system has a real opportunity to address that. I suppose when I come to the point around the 50 million per year for early years, am I right in saying that's quite significant? And currently early years would be typically provided within community and voluntary groups. How does the Minister envisage early years given that investment to be delivered?
Yeah, I mean, don't forget, what we're talking about is reaching a point in terms of 50 million where at the end of year 5 or year 6 it would be £50 million additional. I think particularly that breaks down that at least half of that is on the basis of the increased hours that will be there in terms of preschool education. It is about a cocktail of measures. It's about a range of other investments within that. But also the member is right as well. Look, it's not simply about whatever happens between now and the end of the mandate. Actually, probably the most critical period is not what can be. I mean, the department will work to implement anything that can be swiftly implemented. They'll get the ball rolling on a range of things. But what will be critical will be what level of commitment is there, actually not by this Executive, but by the next Executive, and where it is in the programme for government, what level of prioritisation is given in terms of funding.
Call Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome much of what's in this report, and I commend the Minister for commissioning it and bringing it to us today. He said in his initial statement that he endorsed the contents of this speech, but I am going to bring him back to the subject of selection, because on page 20 the panel recognised that though academic selection, the transfer test, was not part of their terms of reference for this, they do talk about transfer testing as socially divisive and warned of the social imbalance, referring to the OECD report from 2012. They also say, and I quote, "As a panel, we feel that addressing this systemic equality should be a priority going forward, and we welcome the explicit inclusion of a review of transfer arrangements in the terms of reference for the independent review of education." Minister, do you endorse that statement?
Well, no, I don't agree with the position on academic selection, and I'd be surprised that if I did on that basis. There are 47 action points arising out of this. I'm happy to endorse all 47 of them and work towards their implementation. You know, it strikes me the one thing that we can say with absolute certainty is that on the issue of academic selection, there will be a range of opinions on that, and that predates not simply any of us in this chamber. It probably actually predates the living existence of virtually everybody in this chamber as well, and is likely to do so for some time. I believe that in terms of academic selection, the removal of academic selection will actually entrench divisions, will increase the difficulties for people from a socially deprived background to have the same choices and opportunities. And as such, I believe it will be a retrograde step. But I entirely appreciate there's plenty in this chamber and beyond who will take a very contrary view.
Call Roy Beggs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would firstly declare an interest as a committee member for Rise and Sure Start and a governor of Rodensvale School. And I welcome this report, like others, and its recognition of the importance of early years and the importance of aspiration. But many disadvantaged areas coincide with weak community infrastructure and indeed high levels of absenteeism from school. So my question to the Minister is, what role do you see for other departments playing in increasing educational aspiration of young people, their parents, and indeed the wider community, so that more of our young people will reach their full potential?
Valid point. I've obviously talked about some of the cross-departmental work that will be needed directly within communities. A lot of that, particularly at early years, falls to the Department of Health. There's also, actually, as we look towards vocational education, a critical role between economy and health. But it is also about working with the community. And that's why, for instance, in terms of the proposals that are there on, I think it's key stage 4 of the, or key area 4 of the report, which looks at actually whole community solutions. If simply we try and find what simply will work within schools, that in and of itself is not enough. And where there's been levels of success, and I think at times, even where there's been areas of weak community infrastructure, I think there's a hunger to see something better for the next generation. I think where that has worked out in practice is where there has been community buy-in and where there has been that buy-in of families, indeed all those on the ground. If it's simply left to something that's tried to be top-down from the Department of Education, then it won't work.
I call Pat Cadney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. And I also welcome the report. I remember, Minister, just whenever you had first taken up your ministerial post to our Speaker's constituency, to Little School John the Baptist, and to see the dedication that we've seen there from the teachers, all of them. My question to you is, you have seen an awful lot more schools than I have visited, but every time I go out, I marvel at the dedication of the teachers. I marvel at their commitment and how they themselves find themselves putting their hands in their own pockets in order to try and go out and stimulate those little bright minds that they have. I welcome what you said earlier about the anti-poverty strategy, which has been brought forward by the Community Minister Haggerty. But do you agree with me that these teachers go way beyond the call of duty in order to see that the facilities is given to the school when the money is not there and available for the Minister?
I'm very happy to endorse, I think, the good work that is happening out there. And again, not simply the professionalism of those people doing their jobs, but the many people within the system who go well beyond the hours of work. You know, I would say, maybe it's appropriate enough to say this because they don't get many comments. I also know from some of my own staff who go well beyond the times that they're supposed to be working as well. I think that those involved with education, particularly within schools, within youth service, do so because it's not simply a job. They see it as a vocation and a calling. And I think for many of them, I think they deliver what is there. I think what is also crucial, and sometimes this is something we're not good at within the system, be it in education or other things, we quite often see very good ideas delivered on the ground, things that are very successful, things that make differences, but sometimes there's a tendency for those to keep them to ourselves. I think one of the key aspects as we move ahead in terms of education is to try to take a look at where there is best practice and to try to share that best practice and try and show what models work within different circumstances, albeit with the truth that there won't necessarily be one size fits all, and what works in the middle of Belfast may not work the same in rural Tyrone, for instance, on that basis. But it is about that shared learning. And I think the joy, particularly of professionals sharing their experience, I think can be very valuable as well.
And that concludes questions on the statement, members. Thank you. And could members please take your ease for a moment or two to switch to the next item. Okay, members. The next item of business is the introduction of the Financial Reporting Departments and Public Bodies Bill, and I call the Minister of Finance to move the first stage.
I beg to introduce the Financial Reporting Departments and Public Bodies Bill, Northern Ireland 2021.
The Clerk, please read the long title.
A bill to amend the law relating to the preparation of estimates and accounts of departments and certain non-departmental public bodies and for connected purposes.
Now that constitutes the bill's first stage, and it shall now be printed. Thank you. Members, take your ease again for one moment. All right, members. The next item of business is the introduction of the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill. I call the Minister for the Economy to move the first stage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to introduce the Parental Bereavement Leave and Pay Bill.
Clerk, please read the long title.
A bill to make provision about leave and pay for employees whose children have died.
And that constitutes the bill's first stage, and it shall now be printed. Thank you. Members, again, take your ease for a moment or two. Okay, members. Members, the next item on the order paper is a motion to affirm a statutory rule, and I will ask the clerk to read the motion.
That the Department's Transfer of Functions Order Northern Ireland 2021 be affirmed.
Thank you, and I call the Junior Minister to move the motion.
Hiram Sukajyan and Runa Korkunkian, I beg to move.
Thank you. And the Business Committee has agreed that there should be no time limit on this debate. Minister, please open the debate on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I welcome the opportunity to bring this transfer of functions order before the Assembly today for its approval. The order is intended to remedy a number of anomalies which have arisen, whereby certain statutory functions have been retained by one department, while the appropriate policy context has in fact transferred to another. Ashrafer dulga shi raktula idir narana awarhaha derera kela shaw alyanas, and the order will therefore transfer statutory responsibility between the relevant departments for the following functions. Those under Section 19 of the Employment Act NI 2016 relating to gender pay disparity information from the Executive Office to the Department for Communities. Secondly, those under the Reservoirs Act NI 2015 relating to the regulation of certain reservoirs from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs to the Department for Infrastructure. And thirdly, those under Article 23 of the Special Educational Needs and Disability Order 2005 relating to the proceedings of the Special Educational Needs and Disability Tribunal on a claim of unlawful discrimination under Chapter 1 of Part 3 of the Order and to the making of a claim from the Department of Education to the Department of Justice. Each Minister either ceding or receiving these functions has signalled their agreement and have agreed that the First Minister and Deputy First Minister bring this transfer of functions order forward. The order will be made in exercise of the powers conferred by Article 8 of the Department's NI Order 1999, which enables the First and Deputy First Minister to assign and transfer functions to and between departments. I can also confirm that all the relevant Assembly committees were consulted about the proposed transfers. I would like to acknowledge their cooperation in consideration of this matter and to thank them for their support and practical approach in doing so. With your permission, I will take a few moments to outline the background and rationale for these proposed transfers. The first function relates to the transfer of responsibility for Section 19 of the Employment Act NI 2016 from my department, that is TEO, to the Department for Communities. Section 19, as enacted, provides that employers must, in accordance with regulations made by the then Office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, publish information showing whether gender pay disparities exist between employees. Where gender pay disparities are identified, an employer must publish an action plan to eliminate them and provide a copy to employees and any recognised trade union. The section required the first set of these regulations to be made by the 30th of June 2017. The section also required the Office of the First and the Deputy First Minister to publish a strategy, including an action plan on eliminating gender pay differences within 18 months of royal assent. Members will be aware that in 2016 there was a major restructuring of departments, and as part of that, policy and statutory responsibility for gender equality matters transferred from OFMD-FM to the new Department for Communities. As part of this reorganisation, OFMD-FM also became the Executive Office. The timing of the respective legislative processes for the Employment Bill, which became the Employment Act, and the 2016 legislation which provided for the restructuring of departments prevented the statutory responsibility for Section 19 of the Employment Act NI 2016 from transferring to the Department for Communities at that time, with OFMDFM's lead policy responsibility for sex discrimination legislation through the Sex Discrimination NI Order 1976 and the Equal Pay NI Act 1970, which had already been transferred by order to the Department for Communities. This was recognised by the previous executive, which agreed to the making of a Department's Transfer of Functions Order in December 2016. The order was to be signed by the First Minister and Deputy First Minister and laid before the Assembly for an affirmative resolution debate, but the dissolution of the Assembly in January 2017 prevented this from happening, and the draft legislation therefore fell. Given the absence of the Assembly and the acknowledgement that the lead for this policy matter properly lies with the Department for Communities, Section 19 has not yet been commenced. The regulations and strategy required by the section have also not been taken forward. The order will therefore allow for the transfer of responsibility for Section 19 to the Department for Communities, the department with the lead policy role for gender equality, and will enable that department to take forward the actions required by this legislation. Turning now to the Reservoirs Act NI 2015, the restructuring of departments in 2016 of all functions carried out by the Rivers Agency on behalf of the former Department of Agriculture and Rural Development to the Department for Infrastructure. However, the statutory functions under the Reservoirs Act NI 2015 were inadvertently not included in the Department's Transfer of Functions Order NI 2016, and consequently, responsibility for the legislation remained with the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Development. Transfer of these functions by means of this therefore required, as this position does not align with the agreement reached on the respective responsibilities of each of the new departments. The Reservoirs NI 2015 Act, when fully commenced, will introduce a framework for the regulation of reservoir safety in the North. Once transferred, this will allow for the consideration of commencement of the relevant sections of this Act and the introduction of subordinate legislation to implement the required maintenance and management regime. The third and final function in this order concerns Article 23 of the Special Educational Needs and Disability NI Order 2005. The function relates to a legislative power to make regulations about the procedure of the Special Educational Needs and Disability Tribunal, responsibility for which passed from the Department of Education to the Department of Justice in 2011 by means of the Department's Transfer of Functions NI Order 2011. However, unfortunately, this legislative power to make regulations about the procedure of the Special Educational Needs and Disability Tribunal, which is contained in Article 23 of the Special Educational Needs and Disability NI Order 2005, was omitted from the 2011 order and therefore remained with the Department of Education. This order provides an opportunity to rectify this mistake and allow the Department of Justice to have all the legislative powers it needs to make procedural regulations for the Special Educational Needs and Disability Tribunal. In conclusion, the order will bring about a necessary realignment of functions with their proper policy context and enable the appropriate departments to commence work to implement the relevant duties and requirements. I therefore, commend this order to the House. Molumsa and Room.
Thank you, Gorobagan. I call the chairperson for the committee for the Executive Office, Colin McGrath.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement and update to the House. And I rise to speak on behalf of the Committee for the Executive Office. I am grateful for the comprehensive manner in which the Minister has described and justified this statutory rule. It leaves comparatively little for me to say on behalf of the committee, other that from the outset the committee has supported the rule and in fact has consistently urged that it be progressed as a matter of urgency. The committee considered the proposal in October last year and in consultation with the other relevant committees approved the making of the rule. The rule itself was considered on the 19th of May this year, and the committee recommended that it is brought before the Assembly. The two key questions the committee had were, firstly, I suppose how on earth the situation arose that legal responsibility for matters could lie with one department while the policy on the matter was the remit of another, and then just really about how long it has taken to rectify this anomaly. I acknowledge the Minister's explanation for these matters, so I won't labour that point, and I will leave it for others to speak on the transfer of the other functions and just comment on those associated with the Executive Office. The committee naturally has a great interest in the rights of women and in gender equality. Indeed, we look forward to engaging with the Department in relation to the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. However, it is right and proper that policy relating to gender pay disparities sits with the Department for Communities, along with the other gender equality matters that were transferred in 2016. Mr Speaker, the Committee for the Executive Office supports the motion. Just to say a few words on my own as an individual MLA on behalf of the SDLP, I welcome the transfer of these powers to the various and relevant departments, and as there's a great emphasis on relevant there. I welcome, for example, the infrastructure role regarding reservoirs. I know that in my own constituency I have had a number of issues where several planning applications have been held up for many years because of maintenance issues with reservoirs, and the department has been powerless to be able to intervene and try and deliver a resolution to a problem with a reservoir, which in some instances was up to 8 or 9 miles away from where the planning applications were. And for some people, they were relying very heavily on that planning application to enable them to sell some land and generate some income for their retirement, and that was held back as a result of something that was happening 8 or 9 miles away, and there was no influence that the department could bear on that. So there were real life problems that were being impacted by some of the decisions that today we are bringing some form of rectification for. So I welcome this motion and I'm happy to support it on behalf of the SDLP.
Thank you. And I call Paul Gibbon, the Chairperson of the Justice Committee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And Junior Minister Kearney's laid out in great detail the aspects of the statutory rule, and I'm only going to address the one that relates to the justice element that the committee considered. The Department of Justice wrote to the committee last June to seek its agreement for the transfer of a statutory function relating to the procedures for the Special Educational Needs and Disability Tribunal, known as SENDIST. From the Department of Education to the Department of Justice. The Department advised that the Executive had agreed in 2010 to transfer responsibility for a number of departmental tribunals to the Department of Justice. The transfer of responsibility for this tribunal to the Department of Justice subsequently took place in 2011. However, the transfer was incomplete due to an oversight by the Department of Justice and a power to make changes to the procedural regulations that govern the practice of the SENDIST remained with the Department of Education. So as a result, both DE and DOJ are required to make regulations to change the procedures, which the Department advised is complex and also inconvenient. The Department indicated that a resolution was required as changes to the regulations will need to be made as a result of the implementation of the Special Educational Needs and Disability Act of 2016 and a Special Educational Needs Framework. It was therefore proposed that the transfer of the necessary functions from DE to DOJ should be included in a forthcoming transfer of function order that would be taken forward by the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. So the committee agreed that it was content, and we wrote to the Department of Justice and the Committee for Education and the Committee for the Executive Office giving support for this proposal. The committee did recently receive correspondence from the Committee for the Executive Office advising that the transfer of functions order giving effect to the transfer of these functions was indeed laid by the Executive Office on the 30th of April, and asking if our committee was content given its impact on the work of DOJ. The committee agreed at our meeting on the 13th of May to inform the Committee for the Executive Office that we were indeed content with the transfer of the power to make these changes to the procedural regulations that govern the practice of the Special Educational Needs and Disability Tribunal from the Department of Education to the Department of Justice. So, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Committee for Justice, I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, August. Martin Anderson. I call Martin Anderson.
As the Minister said, the transfer function order covers 3 areas. Some of them have already been touched on. The gender pay gap being transferred from the Executive Office to the Department for Community. The transfer of the regulations of certain reservoirs from DERA to the Department for Infrastructure, and it's that which I want to return to and speak to. And then the third is the transfer of the special needs and disability tribunals from the Department of Education to the Department of Justice. Over 7 years ago, if the Assembly wants to remind itself, in this chamber, the current Minister for Education, Peter Weir, was informed by the then Minister for Agriculture and Rural Development, Minister Michelle O'Neill, that her department had begun discussions with the Department for Environment on developing a reservoir bill. As discussions progressed, a number of milestones in developing and legislating for the reservoir bill was to be the transfer of responsibilities from reservoirs from DERA to the Department of Infrastructure through a transfer of functions order that we have here today. But until now, today, it did not happen. And I want to, like other members in this chamber, express my deep frustration that it's taken us so long to get to this point. It absolutely beggars belief that such a relatively straightforward piece of work has taken so long because of oversight or maybe incompetency. I have raised this issue countless times in the Infrastructure Committee, of which I am a member, the Executive Office Committee, of which I am also a member. I have tabled written questions, letters to the Minister for Infrastructure, and I still haven't received an adequate explanation as to the reasons why and how the staff and officials responsible for reservoirs ended up, rightly so, in the Department for Infrastructure, yet the legislative competency for reservoirs ended up or stayed in DERA, although I do acknowledge the comments today from the Minister. This blunder, however it happened, has stopped the development of a reservoir bill for the North and has had significant implications for my own constituency of Derry, and I know for other constituencies as well. The current legislation has meant that the Department for Infrastructure's River Agency must recommend a blanket planning blight in some departments and some parts of Derry due to the conditions of, for instance, the Craigan Reservoir. This has effectively stymied a number of key economic and community developments until what some might say is a minor but necessary safety work is financed and undertaken. It has blocked, for instance, Catalyst Inc. from implementing their expansion plans in Fort George in Derry, a former Army military barracks, essentially hitting the pause button on job creations there. It has delayed the Glens Development Initiative from building a new community centre in the area and mothballed plans for additional social housing that we desperately need in Derry. And it has implications for the future A2 Buncrana dualling project and the expansion of Magee University campus. So in the absence of the reservoir bill that's referred to in the transfer of functions being progressed, and thankfully we are here today, I have proactively engaged discussions with Derry City and Strabane District Council, the River Agency and the Department for Communities to urgently identify a cocktail of funding to undertake the safety work at the Craigan Reservoir. I am delighted that in response to these engagements that Sinn Féin Minister Deirdre Hargey has offered a substantial funding package to help address the funding shortfall for the safety works of the reservoir in Craigan, even though the Department for Communities has no responsibility whatsoever for the Craigan Reservoir. As we know from this discussion today and what's been brought forward, it is the Department for Infrastructure, but Sinn Féin ministers are serious about fixing problems. And I am aware that discussions are continuing with the Council and with the Department for Infrastructure River Agency to address the rest of the funding shortfall in the context of this transfer of functions order. Now that we are finally coming to the point where the transfer of functions order is to be enacted, I would urge, for instance, in this case, the Minister for Infrastructure to work with her officials to ensure that the reservoir bill that's referred to in the transfer of functions order comes to this chamber as soon as possible for scrutiny. The Minister now must take the action that's needed, because once this transfer of function passes, reservoirs will be firmly under the Department for Infrastructure's responsibility, where it always should have been. And when we were doing the restructuring of the departments, that's where it should have ended up in the first place. This will help not just Derry, but it will help other reservoirs that need the attention that they do in other constituencies as well. So I'm asking Minister Mallon, I'm hoping that her officials are listening in today with regards to her own officials, and to work with her officials and with the river agencies and with the Derry City and Strabane District Council to urgently finance the remainder of the Craigan Reservoir works, so this planning blight, which has been for far too long delayed and derailed a wide range of strategic projects in Derry, can finally be removed. So I welcome the fact that we have finally got to this point here today. Thank you.
Thank you, and I call Andrew Muir.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I rise to speak on this motion as the Alliance Party's infrastructure spokesperson and also a member of the Infrastructure Committee. The approval of this motion today is required to correct an omission in the transfer of all the functions of the Rivers Agency from DERA to the Department of Infrastructure back in 2016. This motion is also to deal with other issues, as other speakers have outlined, but I will speak primarily here in relation to the reservoirs and infrastructure. In the absence of the formal powers, the Minister for Infrastructure has been unable to commence the Reservoirs Act, which is required so that the Minister can introduce orders and regulations to implement the reservoir safety regime provided for by the Act, which is based on industry best practice for the management and the maintenance of reservoirs. In summary, therefore, the delay in the transfer of function has had a material impact on the Minister's ability to implement a regime that is vital for ensuring reservoir safety in Northern Ireland.
The member for what he said. Would he agree with me that the delay wasn't helped by a 3-year absence of this place, which was brought about by some of the parties that have to rectify some of the problems that we're addressing today?
I thank the member for his intervention. The reason for the delay, and we're standing here today, is threefold. One, in relation to the transfer back in 2016. Second of all, these institutions didn't sit for 3 years. We can never allow that to happen. We failed the people of Northern Ireland by not having these institutions, and I think that is a serious issue. And the third one is the delay in actually seeing this motion here today. Devolution was restored back in January last year, and it's now June, before we're getting this motion before us. So let's be clear on the reasons for the delay, and also be clear that by passing this today, and hopefully we will, this isn't just finished, this is the commencement of orders. We could be a long way away until the reservoir safety regime is implemented. So this isn't good enough. And as the Department of Infrastructure has estimated, 83,000 people live within an inundation zone of our 179 reservoirs. Furthermore, there are 9 reservoirs which cannot be named for security reasons, where urgent interventions is required to deal with flood risk. And I know of one of those, which will not name today, but require immediate work to take effect. But without the full commencement of the Reservoirs Act, the Department has not had the power to be able to compel that to take place. We are still reliant upon goodwill and the attempts to evoke powers years and years after the Act was passed. Officials have confirmed that properties are located near these 9 reservoirs, and there is a risk to life and property if one of those reservoirs were to catastrophically collapse or fail. Even more concerning is the fact that, for security reasons, none of those living within the inundation zone of those 9 reservoirs have been informed of the need for urgent interventions. So, in summary, Mr. Speaker, today's transfer of functions is not some mere administrative quirk, but is an essential step, and it is just that, a step, in addressing an extremely serious issue which has potentially life or death consequences in Northern Ireland. The question that needs to be answered, therefore, is why on earth has it taken so long to bring this before the House? This has had a massive impact, particularly upon planning applications, as other members have outlined. I know a number of planning applications which are now held up because the Assembly didn't deliver, and that is having an impact upon economic well-being and growth, and also the ability to deliver upon housing. We are nearly 18 months into the restoration of power sharing in Northern Ireland, and it is only now that this matter is being dealt with. Why was this not proceeded as a matter of urgency? And how can the Executive Office be so relaxed about it? The last time this was discussed, I understood it was in the Executive Office. There's far too many things that are stuck in the Executive Office. We have a situation where you can't even get issues onto the agenda, never mind discussed or agreed upon. The people in Northern Ireland have become accustomed to certain aspects of government here moving at glacial pace. But as we have seen with COVID-19, when there is an emergency situation, the people of Northern Ireland demand action, and they demand action fast. It would seem that in the matter that we are debating here today, the Executive Office and the 2 main parties which control the Executive Office have totally failed in that regard. It is by sheer good fortune that no damage has been done as a result of the severe delay in bringing this before the Assembly. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I will be supporting this today, and I hope everyone else will. But I expect a full and clear explanation from the Executive Office as to why it has taken 18 months to bring this before us today, given the seriousness of the issue for the people living here in Northern Ireland. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. And I call Roy Beggs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too wish to speak regarding the transfer of the powers associated with the 2015 Reservoirs Act. This has been a very serious admission when we had the reorganisation of departments in Northern Ireland. An error was made and the full powers were not passed to enable the Reservoirs Act to be fully enacted. And as others have said, it has had significant implications for those who have sought planning applications below those reservoirs. And in addition, it's not just about a planning application, it is about the protection of property and possibly even lives. And if anyone has any doubt about what we're talking about areas of water with more than 10,000 cubic metres of water. That is 10,000 tonnes potentially that could be unleashed if there is an unsafe structure. So that can have a devastating effect below it. Now, others have spoken of the delay in correcting the emission. It's actually more than the 16 months. Reorganisation happened in 2016. So we had, first of all, that period of that Assembly up until January 2017, when the correction could have occurred. Then we had the 3 years when we had no Assembly here. And then, since then, with another 15, 16 months since this Assembly re-established. Our committee, the Infrastructure Committee, was getting briefed on this issue. And indeed, we had to get to the stage of writing to the Executive Office. Such was our concerns when we were briefed on it. We have to give credit to the officials in the Department of Infrastructure, They're trying to work with the owners, the responsible owners, to try and progress and bring about improvements to those structures, or if necessary to reduce the water levels to provide that reassurance and safety. Each body of water has to be independently inspected by a suitably qualified civil engineer. But in some instances, there's a dispute about who owns it. So the department needs the powers to progress this in order to protect the public. Why? Why has it taken so long? And I too would wish that the Junior Minister will explain that, because that has been a dereliction of duty in the Executive Office, that this transfer has not happened years ago. I would wish to indicate my support for this transfer. It's vitally important that this omission is corrected, and that the public can be reassured, and that the Department will have the powers to bring about the necessary improvement where defects are uncovered, and to ensure that there is safety for the public and for their property, and indeed to enable those who wish to extend their planning applications, that will be an option as well. I wish to support the transfer.
Nicole Kelly-Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department's Transfer of Functions Order Northern Ireland 2021 moves Section 19 of the Employment Act NI 2016 to the Department of Communities. Section 19 requires the Department to publish information on the gender pay gap in Northern Ireland. I welcome this move, as it brings into the Department all the employer action plans that identify how that employer will eliminate where a gap between the pay provided to men and women exists. I'm also delighted to note that this transfer of functions will bring together workforce statistics relating to ethnicity and disability. As the Department for Communities is responsible for the gender and disability strategies, it makes sense for data to be collected by this department. The racial equality strategy is retained within the Executive Office, and I look forward to some concentrated work being completed to ensure that data is collected relating to ethnicity. I know that this is something the Equality Commission has been looking to be collated through the Fair Employment and Equality Monitoring. As anyone who knows me knows, I want the Fair Employment Monitoring change to better reflect and measure all Section 75 categories, and not just whether someone is Catholic or Protestant. But that is a debate for another day. As Deputy Chair of the All-Party Group on Disability, I will now speak about the transfer of functions from Education to the Department of Justice of the Special Education Needs and Disability Northern Ireland Order 2005, specifically Section 23 that relates to procedure of the Tribunal. The original transfer between departments was incomplete in the 2011 order, and that is being put right today. It now gives the Department of Justice all the legislative powers it needs to make procedural regulations for the Special Education Needs and Disability Tribunal. As my colleague Andrew Muir has said, this has been some time in coming, but today this legislation that I will be supporting puts right a number of mistakes and errors and incomplete pieces of legislation that have been needed. I'm sorry that it has taken this long. This should be a quick transfer of functions. It should have been done months ago. Thank you very much.
And I call the Junior Minister to conclude and wind on the debate on this motion. Cormac.
And I want to welcome the mainly affirmative contributions from most of the members who have spoken this morning. I think that this particular motion, this order and this discussion is an absolute reminder that government in this place, indeed government anywhere, needs to be established on robust, firm legislative foundations. And it follows that departmental functions must then be tightly aligned with the correct policy context within which departments and the collective of government must operate. I also think that it underlines the imperative of the role for our scrutiny committees, the democratic role which our scrutiny committees perform, and a number of the contributions made during the course of this debate reflect the role which members of those committees have played. But it also, demonstrates that legislative powers the legislative basis of government does in fact have a material effect on the lives of our citizens, and also in relation to the discharge and the implementation of public policy across all of the relevant areas. So, go buíochas leis na Harry Exala, na Hifigi Narana, agus Costi and Channel as Oct a Gudge Irakti. And I do wish to record my thanks to all of the members who have contributed this morning, but also to the relevant ministers, the Ministers of Justice, Infrastructure, Education, Communities, who have all, and Agriculture, who have all contributed to this process in a very collegiate and positive manner. I also want to thank the officials who have assisted in the process in getting us to this particular point and in enabling us to bring forward corrections to the anomalies that have existed and allowing for this order to be brought to the Chamber and passed today. It will ensure, that the statutory responsibility is corrected and transferred to the appropriate departments to allow the functions to be fully implemented.
And the question is, the Department's Transfer of Functions Order NI 2021 be affirmed. All those in favour say aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Can members please take a raise for a moment or two?
Thank you, members. The next item on the order paper is the final stage of the Pension Schemes Bill. I call on the Minister for Communities, Ms Deirdre Hargey, to move the final stage. Minister.
I beg to move.
Thank you. The final stage of the Pension Schemes Bill has been moved. The Business Committee has agreed that there should be no time limit on this debate, and I call the Minister for Communities to open the debate. Minister.
Thanks very much. And again, I'm just pleased to have the opportunity to move the final stage of this important bill today. Pensions are of pivotal importance in helping to secure a comfortable life for people in their later years. It's vital that we do what we can to make sure those pensions are secure and members' interests are protected. This is why the provisions of this bill in particular for the better regulation of master trusts are so important. Members will be aware that the pensions landscape has changed significantly over recent years, and as a result the way in which people can save and access their pension savings has been transformed. Automatic enrolment has resulted in a significant increase in the number of people being enrolled into a workplace pension. Master trusts have become a popular vehicle for employers, particularly small and micro employers seeking to enrol employees into an occupational pension scheme. A master trust is a form of multi-employer occupational pension scheme for unconnected employers, where instead of the employer setting up their own pension scheme, the scheme is provided by an external organisation which runs the pension scheme for numerous employers. Such schemes offer benefits to both employers and members. They can spur competition in the market and allow for economies of scale, providing value for money. They are also an efficient solution for smaller employers for whom setting up an individual pension scheme would be difficult and prohibitively expensive. Currently, master trusts are regulated in accordance with the occupational pensions legislation. However, that legislation was developed with a single employer pension scheme in mind, and consequently it doesn't take into consideration the different structures and dynamics of master trusts which give rise to different risks. The bill is a response not to the fundamental problem with master trusts, but rather to the exceptional growth in membership. In 2010, across Britain and here, there were 0.2 million members of master trusts. By November 2019, there were 16 million members in 37 trust schemes, holding more than £36 billion in assets. The introduction of a new authorisation regime is designed to address the legislative gap and to try and prevent problems arising in the future. The aim is to ensure that essential protections are put in place in a way which are proportionate to the risks experienced by master trusts. Under the new regime, master trusts will be prohibited from operating unless authorised by the pensions regulator. The bill sets out specific requirements which must be met in order for the scheme to be authorised. For example, in relation to financial sustainability, governance and the fitness of people involved in the scheme. In addition, the regulator will also be given new powers to supervise master trusts, enabling it to intervene where schemes are at risk and falling below the required standards. The regulator must be notified in writing if significant events occur in relation to an unauthorised master trust scheme. The intention is that a list of significant events will capture events which could affect the ability of master trust to continue meeting the authorisation criteria. For example, the scheme may have a change of trustee, and as the fitness and propriety of the trustee is linked to the authorisation criteria, the regulator must be informed of such a change so that the new trustee may be assessed against the relevant standards. The regulator will also seek to support and assist those involved in running a pension scheme. However, there is a need of clear consequences for schemes which fail to comply with their duties. Information gathering is an important part of the regulator's toolkit, and the Pensions NI Order 2005 already makes it a criminal offence for individuals to fail to provide information requested by the regulator. The bill extends these powers to include those involved in running master trusts. Ultimately, the regulator also has the power to withdraw a scheme's authorisation, essentially forcing it to leave the market. These powers are designed to help ensure that those managing master trust schemes will continue to protect the interests of members. And turning to the remaining provisions of the bill, since the introduction of the new pension freedoms in April 2015, which enable many aged 55 and over to access their pension savings more flexibly, individuals faced a range of potential barriers, including occurring early exit charges when seeking to access their savings. Schedule 18 of the Pensions Act NI 2015 allows the Department to make regulations that restrict charges or impose requirements on certain pension schemes. The bill allows the Department to make regulations to provide that any term in the contract which is inconsistent with something in the regulations made under Schedule 18 is overridden. For example, if a contract that is placed between the trustees or managers of the scheme and a person who provides services to the scheme permits an early exit charge that is higher than the level of early exit charge cap, this would allow the term to be overridden. The policy supports the policy intention of capping early exit charges in occupational pension schemes and banning member-borne commission arising under the existing contracts. In conclusion, the pension market is continually evolving and modernising, and it's clear that there's a need to ensure that adequate regulation for master trusts, given how they have developed since the introduction of the automatic enrolment. And I trust members are content with the broad thrust of this bill. I know that pensions legislation can be somewhat complex, and therefore I want to thank the Chair of the Communities Committee and indeed the Committee and the Assembly in the positive manner that they have conducted this.
Thank you, Minister. I call the Deputy Chair of the Communities Committee, Ms Kelly Armstrong.
Thank you very much, Principal Deputy Speaker, and I am deputising today for the Chair of the Committee, and I thank the Minister for her kind comments. The Committee for Communities welcomes the final stage of this bill, which overall is designed to safeguard workers' pensions and introduce a welcome new regulatory framework for master trusts in Northern Ireland. Over the past few years, master trusts have become very popular, and I, for one, have learnt a lot about these trusts and pensions regulations through the course of the bill. A master trust is a multi-employer occupational scheme for unconnected employers run on behalf of these organisations by an external organisation. It is popular with small employers, and for anyone who's like me, who has had a number of employments before coming to this House, will be very delighted that somebody's keeping them all together. This type of scheme has grown across the UK from membership of 0.2 million in 2010 to 16 million by 2019, and there are around 100,000 members of such schemes in Northern Ireland alone. While the growth in this type of scheme is to be welcomed, there is obviously a need to have appropriate measures in place to ensure that the risks are managed. Fundamentally, that is what this bill does. The committee was first briefed on the bill on the 17th of June 2020 by departmental officials who confirmed that it would ensure that no master trust scheme can operate without authorisation from the pensions regulator and that specific requirements must be met. Another area that the bill deals with is administration charges. Some people have been faced with early exit charges when trying to access their pension savings. The committee is content that this bill will cap early exit charges in occupational pension schemes, and again, this has to be something that is welcomed, as it will enable people to get more from their hard-earned savings. Principal Deputy Speaker, the committee reported on the Pension Schemes Bill on the 19th of November 2020. Having considered the provisions of the bill at 8 meetings and having taken oral evidence from Northern Ireland Assembly Research and Information Service, the Workers' Pension Trust and the Pensions Regulator, the committee agreed the clauses as drafted once members were reassured by responses from the Department and from witnesses to a number of queries. Members wanted to be sure that the master trusts are properly regulated and to allow the pensions regulator to make full use of its powers in Northern Ireland. Another key issue for members was the protections that will be put in place for people's pensions through the bill, as members felt that it is not outside the realms of possibility that a master trust could collapse. Whilst members of master trusts would not have access to the Pension Protection Fund, there is a safety net in the bill in the event of a scheme being underfunded due to fraud. Members were also reassured to hear that the pensions regulator could operate across the border if necessary to address schemes that operate both in Northern Ireland and the Republic. During the committee stage, officials advised that a number of amendments would be necessary at consideration stage in a consequence of the Westminster Pension Schemes Bill, which at that time was before Parliament. The committee was then briefed by the officials at its meeting on the 22nd of April 2021. On the text of the amendments and was content that they did not represent new policy or changes to the original policy intent. I would like to thank the officials Jerry McCann and Doreen Roy for their assistance during the committee stage and their patience with technical explanations and briefings on these amendments. The Chair, Paula Bradley, confirmed at consideration stage that the committee was content that the amendments were technical drafting and consequential amendments required to the Pension Schemes Bill as a result of the Westminster Pension Schemes Act 2021. The committee also noted that legislative consent motions in relation to the Westminster Pension Schemes Act 2021 were agreed by the Assembly on the 1st of June and the 2nd of November 2020. Principal Deputy Speaker, overall, this bill is designed to safeguard workers' pensions and to ensure good pensions governance. Therefore, on behalf of the committee, I support the bill. And finally, as the Alliance Community spokesperson, dealing with a bill in this matter, and I'd like to pay tribute to our Minister on this. It is a very technical bill. It is one of those bills that can cause a lot of confusion. Thank goodness we have great officials. This bill does align Northern Ireland pension provision and pension holders with the rest of the United Kingdom, and it does confirm that pension holders will be better protected. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Ms Karen Mullen.
Prelas Cian Collier, I rise to speak on the final stage of the Pensions Bill. It is clear that the Masters Trusts have emerged as a popular choice following the introduction of auto-enrolment, and that the manner in which people manage and access their pensions has changed over the years. It is therefore crucial that the regulations evolve and keep pace with this, and that additional safeguards are put in place for pension scheme members. This bill is a result of that process. I want to thank the Minister and the Deputy Chair of the Committee for summarising the detail of this bill today and for highlighting the main aspects, which include the additional powers for the pensions regulator and capping off early exit charges in occupational pension schemes. I also want to acknowledge and thank the research team and the Department of officials who have provided briefings and information when required to support the scrutiny of this bill as it has made its way through the various stages. I am content that this improved regulation and oversight will provide better protection for pension scheme members and their savings, and therefore I support this final stage of the bill.
Mr Mark Durkan.
Thank you, Mr Principal. Deputy Speaker, I rise in support of the bill. I have previously iterated concerns around the use of accelerated passage and I think a justifiable wariness around LCMs, but we did recognise and do recognise the degree of urgency required here, given that pension scheme members here had been placed at a disadvantage to their counterparts in Britain. This bill will bolster protections for pension savers, providing people with a safety net of assurances around their pension schemes. It's therefore vital that these safeguards are implemented without delay. The legislation also addresses barriers. The Deputy Chair had referred to the early exit charges, for example, that scheme holders faced, and it affords them more flexibility and more freedom. I'd like to echo the thanks of other members to officials and to the Minister for their work on this important piece of legislation. Support the bill.
No other member has indicated to me that they wish to speak, so I now call on the Minister to wind up on the debate. Minister.
Yeah, thanks very much. And again, thanks very much for the Vice Chair and all of the speakers today. And I suppose, just quickly, this is about protections and safeguards and making sure that we're looking at master trusts and making sure that they are adequately regulated. So again, I just want to put this then at the end. So just to thank everybody for their engagement. Thank Jerry and the team as well, just for the work that they have done with the committee behind the scenes. And just thanks for the pace in which this has moved through to make sure we can extend protections.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that the pension scheme bill do now pass. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Contrary, if any, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Members will just take their ease for a few seconds before we move on to the next item of business. Thank you, members. The next item of business is a motion from the Committee for Infrastructure on unadopted roads. I ask the Clerk to please read the motion.
That this Assembly recognises the systemic failures in the current process for adopting roads and services in new developments, notes with concern the Department for Infrastructure's inability to quantify the precise number of those households and developments affected, further recognises the resourcing constraints within the Department that exacerbate the problem, and is concerned by the lack of progress made in addressing these failures since they were highlighted in a Regional Development Committee report in 2012, acknowledges the impact these failings are having on communities living in affected developments, calls on the Minister for Infrastructure to take steps to reduce the backlog of unadopted roads and services as a matter of urgency, and to work with executive colleagues to identify areas where cross-departmental working can be used to alleviate the impact of resource constraints, and further calls on the Minister, in line with the 2012 report recommendations, to formulate and implement a more robust and time-constrained package of guidance and enforcement that includes ensuring appropriate bond levels to complete works and a review of the main statutory instruments.
Thank you. I call the Chairperson of the Committee for Infrastructure, Ms Michelle McElveen, to move the motion.
Move, Mr Deputy Principal Speaker.
Thank you. The Business Committee has agreed to allow up to 1 hour and 30 minutes for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have 10 minutes to propose and 10 minutes to wind. All other speakers will have 5 minutes. And as we have now just passed 12:50, unless Ms McElveen is intending to use her full 10 minutes, she is. That being the case, we will have to wait until after question time. The Business Committee is scheduled to meet at 1. Sorry, but if members would take their ease, thank you. The sitting is by leave suspended. Thank you.
Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Plenary. Programme signed. This is the